I attach particular importance to honoring my commitments in the same spirit I had on several occasions stated at the time of the adoption of the Constitution of the Third Republic in 2016 that I did not wish to run for another presidential term.
Greetings, family, and welcome to GhanaPlusTv, your digital home for African voice. This isn't just a content. This is our report, our story, our truth. If you love Africa and want to stay plugged in, you are already in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and drop your thoughts under the comment section. Let's dive in, family.
Ivory Coast has just done something strange to Burkina Faso, and this is something that most of you never expected that Ivory Coast could ever do to Burkina Faso. Just imagine, as we speak, there are about 3 trucks which are believed that belongs to the terrorists which have been arrested in the border between Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso. It said that these trucks, their main target was to destabilize the security in Burkina Faso. They were even planning to go up to the capital city of Burkina Faso to cause chaos in that region. This comes after we all thought that the president of Ivory Coast had already changed by chasing away all the French military bases that were in Ivory Coast. But it turns out that the president of Ivory Coast was just playing low over the plans that he had for Burkina Faso. As we speak, those 3 trucks have been already scrutinized, and it said that inside there were about 100 motorbikes which were believed to be used by the terrorists. These motorbikes were to be used by terrorists to destabilize the security in most regions of Burkina Faso. And as we speak, the security of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has been fighting so hard to stabilize the security in the entire parts of Burkina Faso. But it seems the president of Ivory Coast is not willing to give Captain Ibrahim Traoré easy time to stabilize the security in those regions.
The security situation in Burkina Faso as of today had become a top priority for Ibrahim Traoré's government after the alleged coup that was supposed to take place on him a couple of days ago. Well, the coup that was stopped, luckily stopped by the security services. I just received some fresh update, but to be honest with you, there is nothing too new in this update that I've just received than what we already know. But they are beginning to touch on fine, little important details, and I'm going to discuss that with you in this very short video. The Burkina Faso army alleged that all the conspirators, everybody involved in the planning of this coup, are all based in the neighboring country, Ivory Coast. I know you already know that. They've got their names, they've got their identities, but the specific, the aim of their plan at large is not yet known. But we know they were trying to delete Ibrahim Traoré, cause mayhem and confusion within the country, and allow France to come in from the back door. We know that. So how did we get here? Why are they trying so hard? Why are they paying so much money to assassinate Ibrahim Traoré, or to get Burkina Faso back under the control of Western organization? Why is that? Let me tell you the reason why very briefly. You see, Ibrahim Traoré took over the country's presidency, and he had shifted away from the traditional ties from France, and he is now seeking more close alliance with Russia, something which Ivory Coast seems to have a problem with. Ivory Coast did not like the idea that Burkina Faso is now becoming so close and friendly with Russia. That is a fact. If you didn't know that, go and look it up. And they want Burkina Faso to reinstate the control of France back in the country, because Ivory Coast themselves are currently under the full control and relationship with France and the West. That is the only reason why they are able to penetrate to come closer to Burkina Faso because Ivory Coast is the weakest link. Ivory Coast is the shorter route for them to go into Burkina Faso. So now you get a story. Ibrahim Traore shifted away from the West, moving toward Russia because he understands what these people give and take. He doesn't want that for his people any longer. He's now moving toward Russia, seeking a close tie and a close alliance with Russia. But the West don't like that. France doesn't like that. Ivory Coast doesn't like that because, hey, Ivory Coast is already under the control of France and the West. So you see what the problem is. The Burkina Faso Security Minister, Mamadou Sana, said the coup attempt was led by both former and current soldiers collaborating with terrorist leader in Ivory Coast. You heard that? That is what Mamadou Sana said, the Burkina Faso Security Minister. He said the coup was planned by both current and former, soldiers, former military personnel collaborating with terrorists in the neighboring country. They are collaborating with terrorist leader in Ivory Coast. The goal of the plot was to attack the presidential palace last week with the intention of showing or causing total mayhem within the country and placing the country under supervision of international organization. France, that was the aim. The aim was to take out Ibrahim Traore. Possibly anybody that is loyal to him will be deleted as well. And then with the arms shipment that was received from France, all the weapon, gun, bombs, ammunition, everything you can imagine that could be used in a war front, apparently was in that ship that was sent to Ivory Coast by France to be sent to Burkina Faso when they've taken out Ibrahim Traore. But thank goodness they failed. God was ahead of them. And they failed big time. So they wanted to attack the presidential palace, cause mayhem, start chaos in the country, and then allow international organization to come in as, you know what they call it, humanitarian, you know what they do it. And then they'll start squeezing the life out of the ordinary people. They'll start spreading their tentacles back into the natural resources. What is France's interest in Burkina Faso? Why can they not leave Burkina Faso alone? Why can they not leave Africa alone? They've colonized the country, we know that. But what is it this time? Why are they coming back to try to colonize the country again in the 20th century? This marks the latest in series of attempted assassination of Ibrahim Traore. Apparently, he had escaped about 10 times. They've tried to eliminate him. And there have been a lot of militant attack across the country, being sponsored and controlled by foreign organization, foreign interest coming through from Ivory Coast. According to Sana, he said the plotter had, attempted to enlist the support of Burkinabe religious and traditional leader as well in order to sway army officers to back the coup. They actually tried to get the attention of Burkinabe religion and traditional leaders. They tried to enlist them. They tried to buy them. Because from the report I heard, they were paying people as much as $5 million US each just to get you on their side. Get the religious leader and the traditional leader so that they can start preaching and start going in the head of the ordinary people, those that believe in all this foreign religion, so that they can get more support for the coup to happen in a very uniform way. God. Let me continue. The plan involved an assault on the presidency home on Wednesday, 16th of April 2025, with a group of soldiers recruited by Burkina Faso adversary, Burkina Faso's enemy. They've already paid and got in the head of a few military officers with money, and they brought them through from Ivory Coast. They are well equipped, ready to get the go for them to carry out their operation. But thank goodness, God was ahead of them. Sana confirmed that the masterminder behind this plot to delete Ibrahim Traore is located outside the country, specifically Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. In other words, how are we going to resolve this problem? Why have these people refused to understand? Why have they refused to... You know what? The comment section is open. Let me know what you guys think.
I attach particular importance to honoring my commitments in the same spirit I had on several occasions stated at the time of the adoption of the Constitution of the Third Republic in 2016 that I did not wish to run for another presidential term. Consequently, I would like to solemnly announce to you that I have decided not to be a candidate in the presidential election.
It was just after 6 p.m. when every screen in Côte d'Ivoire went dark. No music, no signal, just silence. Then suddenly, the feed returned. Grainy, unsteady, live. There, sitting alone at the desk of the national broadcaster RTI, was a man who had ruled for 14 years. No flag behind him, no generals at his side, just a worn-out face and a shaking voice. Alassane Ouattara. He adjusted his collar, looked straight into the lens, then spoke, without emotion. To the people of Côte d'Ivoire, I address you not as your president, but as a citizen of this nation. The air across the country froze. In markets, people stopped mid-transaction. In barracks, soldiers turned up the volume. In homes, families clutched hands. For the sake of national unity, and to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, I have taken the decision to resign, effective immediately. No applause, no orchestra, just 5 seconds of silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping the floor as he stood up and walked off screen. Just like that, it was over. The regime that survived protests, elections, rebellions, and international scandals collapsed under the weight of one voice. And not his, because everyone knew it wasn't just pressure. It was a warning, delivered days earlier, from a commander who had never stepped into politics, until now. And somewhere in Ouagadougou, far from the cameras, Captain Ibrahim Traore received a short message from his aide. He did it. It's done. Traore said nothing. He just closed his notebook and whispered, "The people moved." And that was all it took. The resignation was public, but the rebellion that caused it, that was born in the shadows, behind the walls of military compounds across Côte d'Ivoire. In Bouaké, the grumbling started quietly. A captain's pay was delayed for the 3rd month in a row. A young soldier was discharged for refusing to fire during a peaceful protest, his only crime, saying, "My rifle is not for shooting Ivorians." In Kohogo, an elite unit returned from a mission to find that their families had gone days without water or food rations. Meanwhile, armored cars were being fueled daily, not for defense, but for presidential convoys. The hypocrisy was no longer invisible. It was everywhere. In the mess halls, in the barracks, in the silence that grew heavier each day. But it wasn't anger that spread. It was doubt. Doubt in orders. Doubt in the man at the top. Doubt in whether they were still protecting a republic or just extending the life of a regime. And in that doubt, a new kind of discipline took root. Meetings stopped happening on the record. Briefings became shorter. When orders came from Abidjan, some units simply didn't respond. Others responded late. One platoon answered a direct command with just 2 words, "We're listening." But they weren't listening to Ouattara anymore. In whispered conversations, one name kept surfacing: Commander Kone, not a politician, not a warlord. A mid-ranking officer who had never posted a selfie or chased headlines, but he had something rare: respect. Men trusted him, not because he promised power, but because he didn't fear truth. He never raised his voice. He never called for a coup. He just asked one question over and over: if we stood down today, would the people stand up tomorrow? And in mess halls and dormitories, across every region of the country, the answer began to take shape. A revolution was forming, not from activists, not from militias, but from the very people trained to protect the regime. They weren't preparing for war, they were preparing to stop lying. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even a direct statement, but to those who understood power, it was a warning wrapped in wisdom. 3 days before Ouattara's resignation, a regional security summit was held in Ouagadougou. Cameras were invited, flags from the Sahel Alliance stood tall, and at the center, wearing his red beret, calm as ever, sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He spoke last. The room was quiet. The world watched. Africa is tired of speeches. Africa is tired of puppets. We will no longer kneel before the ghosts of empire. The applause was polite, but it was what he said next, off script, that made the room stop breathing. If leadership forgets the people will remember their strength. And when that strength rises, it doesn't need permission. He never mentioned Ouattara. He didn't have to. In Abidjan, the message was received. Ouattara's intelligence briefed him that the Burkinabe president's words were causing agitation among junior officers. He dismissed it with a wave. Traoré is young, let him talk. But he underestimated something far more powerful than age: credibility. Because in the barracks across Côte d'Ivoire, Traoré wasn't just another head of state. He was the symbol of what soldiers could be: honest, unbought, unshaken. His words played on phones in military kitchens. They were copied onto walls in chalk. One lieutenant wrote it on a sheet of paper and taped it inside his locker. The people will remember their strength. And then, something strange happened. At least 4 military bases across Côte d'Ivoire reported that their soldiers had stopped responding to certain internal radio frequencies. But they weren't ignoring everything. They were tuned in to one new private channel, encrypted, foreign, and untraceable. Later, analysts would confirm it originated from a scrambled relay bouncing through Ouagadougou. Whatever Traoré was doing, it wasn't just diplomacy, it was inspiration, and inspiration in the hands of the betrayed is fuel for revolt. While the world watched Traoré speak from Ouagadougou, another man, quiet, unknown, uninvited, was making history of his own. Commander Amadou Kone. Not a politician, not a rebel, just a mid-ranking officer stationed in Abidjan, once loyal to the presidency, now loyal to something deeper: the people. He had no social media, no medals beyond what he'd earned in real combat. But in the mess halls and courtyards of military bases, his name began to spread, not like a shout, but like a secret. Who was he? A son of a cocoa farmer, trained in France but disillusioned. He had seen too much: ministers stealing aid, generals selling weapons, and soldiers being ordered to silence protests with tear gas they could barely afford to load. Kone never raised his fist. He never gave fiery speeches. He just listened, and then he acted. Quietly, he began visiting regional commanders, one by one. At first, just to check in, then to ask a simple question. If the Constitution no longer matters to them, why should our uniforms protect theirs? No threats, no talk of coups, just truth and the unbearable weight of it. The turning point. In late April, Kone called a closed meeting of officers at an undisclosed garrison outside Yamoussoukro. Inside a dimly lit hall, without cameras, he spoke for the first time to more than a dozen ranking commanders. We have served a man who abandoned his people. We have followed orders that betrayed our flag. Today, I ask not for rebellion. I ask for responsibility. Silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. No announcement was made. No memo distributed. But from that day on, orders from the presidency began to fail. Convoys delayed, communications dropped, and guards who once stood firm at the palace began rotating out and not returning. A shift was happening, not in public view, but beneath the boots that once held the regime up, and at the center of that shift stood Commander Kone. When news of the unfolding tension in Côte d'Ivoire reached Paris, panic didn't break out immediately. It arrived in waves. At first, advisors in the Élysée Palace called it contained unrest. Then, when reports showed loyalist generals not answering calls, it became potential instability. But when they heard that Commander Kone had begun visiting bases without clearance from the presidency, they knew this wasn't instability, it was collapse in slow motion, the call that was never answered. President Emmanuel Macron made a direct attempt to intervene. He picked up the red line, the direct military liaison channel, and tried to reach General Bakari, Ouattara's highest-ranking officer still believed to be loyal. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. A third attempt was rerouted to voicemail. The tone was clinical, cold. "This contact is unavailable. Please leave your message." Macron slammed the receiver. "Get me Ouattara." Within minutes, he was on the line with a man who sounded less like a president and more like a cornered CEO. "Everything is under control," Ouattara insisted. "Just a few misinformed units. We will handle it internally." But Macron wasn't convinced. He knew the signs. He'd seen them before, in Burkina, Mali, Niger. This wasn't just an officer acting out. This was a system beginning to bleed from the inside. The France-Afrique firewall was failing. For decades, France had relied on a simple equation in West Africa: keep the president happy, control the economy, manage the military. But now, the middle link, the army, was breaking. And if the army couldn't be controlled, France had no leverage. One French military attaché stationed in Abidjan reportedly told his colleagues, "We don't have allies here anymore, only names we paid to obey." Inside the French Foreign Ministry, someone whispered a line that would never be printed in any press release. "If Kone speaks for the soldiers, then Ouattara is already finished." It was just before midnight when the envelope arrived. No military escort, no stamp of office. Just a plain white folder slipped beneath the doors of Ouattara's private residence by a soldier in full uniform who never said a word. Inside it was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no accusations, just a sentence. "You have 24 hours to leave with your name intact. After that, you leave with your title in flames." At the bottom, no signature, only 3 words: "We are ready." The president sat in silence. Around him, his usual circle of advisors was gone. Some had vanished, some had gone on leave, others had simply stopped answering their phones. His ministers were ghosting him, his generals were ignoring him, even his own spokesperson had gone quiet on Twitter. And outside, the barracks were no longer loyal. The streets were calm, too calm. No chants, no protests. Everyone was waiting, a lonely man at the top. For years, Ouattara had built a kingdom of concrete and silence. Every critic was dismissed as bitter, every protester called ungrateful. He ruled like a man convinced that the people would never dare touch the crown. But now, the crown was cracking, and the throne was empty, even while he sat in it. In a private meeting with what remained of his cabinet, one aide dared to ask, "Do you want to go down fighting or walk away before your legacy burns?" Ouattara stared at him, not with anger, not even with regret, just exhaustion. "They didn't beat me," he said. "I just stayed too long." Across town, Commander Kone stood before a group of senior officers, his voice steady. "If he does not resign, we move before the next dawn. No blood, no fire, just closure." And for the first time in modern Ivorian history, the army stood on the edge of removing a sitting president, without a coup, without a bullet, just truth. Everyone was watching the clock, and in Abidjan, the wind changed direction. The countdown ended at 6:01 p.m. No presidential anthem, no press conference, no national flag standing behind him, just a man and a microphone. Alassane Ouattara entered the RTI broadcast room flanked by no one. His face looked hollow, his eyes sunken, the weight of 14 years in power now pressing down on a frame that could no longer carry it. Millions were watching, in homes, on phones, inside military dorms and market stalls. He sat, adjusted the single page in front of him, cleared his throat, and began to speak. To my fellow Ivorians, for the past decade I have led this country with conviction, with mistakes, yes, but always with the belief that stability matters. There was no energy in his voice, no defiance, only defeat wrapped in carefully chosen words. But there comes a moment when leadership becomes an obstacle, and if unity is to survive, I must step aside. He paused. His hand trembled slightly. Therefore, I announce my immediate resignation and transfer all executive duties to the Transitional Military Authority. Silence followed. Not applause, not protest, just the quiet breath of a nation in disbelief. He folded the paper, looked directly into the camera and said, "May Côte d'Ivoire find peace beyond me." Then he stood and walked away. No guards, no procession, no farewell wave, just the sound of his footsteps on a cold tile floor and the fall of a regime that ended not with fire but with surrender. Across the country, people watched in shock. In Yopougon, a group of elders clapped, not in celebration, in closure. In Bouaké, a young woman covered her mouth and whispered, "Did that really just happen?" And in a barracks outside Korhogo, a sergeant picked up his rifle, unloaded it, and placed it back on the rack. "We didn't need bullets," he said. "We just needed to believe." Ouattara left the stage, but history had already walked ahead of him. 2 hours after Ouattara's resignation, the nation's screens turned black again. Then, without music or preamble, the camera cut to a military press room, clean, undecorated, and tense. At the center stood a man who had never given a public speech before. Commander Amadou Kone, no stars on his shoulders, no grand medals, just a calm face, clear eyes, and a voice sharpened by quiet conviction. He looked into the lens, adjusted the mic, and said, "The Republic is not broken. It has simply been reclaimed." The nation held its breath. "We did not seize power. We removed a barrier between the people and their future." Kone's tone was firm but not aggressive, calm but not submissive. He didn't call himself president. He didn't demand loyalty. He offered something the country hadn't seen in years, a way forward. Effective immediately, the military command is establishing a transitional council. Its purpose is to restore democratic order, protect national security, and ensure every Ivorian voice is heard in the process of rebuilding. He then listed 3 core priorities: the release of all political prisoners, the stabilization of essential services, the drafting of a civilian-led election roadmap within 90 days. This is not a military regime. This is a moment of national healing. The streets reacted fast. In Abobo, people poured into the streets again, not to protest, but to dance. In Man, students gathered around radios and cheered. In San Pedro, church bells rang and mosque loudspeakers echoed prayers of peace. Even critics of the army paused, because what they saw was not ambition, but order, and what they heard, in Kone's voice, was not conquest, but courage. Across the border in Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré watched the speech from a dimly lit command room. He said only 5 words. That man was born ready. The power vacuum had been filled, but not with a crown, with a mission. And Kone had just stepped into history, not as a ruler, but as a guardian of possibility. The city didn't sleep that night. Abidjan, once blanketed in tension and fear, exploded into light, not from gunfire, but from fireworks. From Yopougon to Cocody, the skyline glowed with sparks. Youths danced in the streets, waving homemade flags and chanting "La patrie avant les présidents." The homeland before the presidents, some cried. Others embraced strangers. And in homes across the country, families sat in stunned silence, trying to process what just happened. Ouattara had resigned, and the army hadn't taken over. They had stepped back. In Bouaké, a mother of 3 lit candles on her doorstep and whispered, "My children won't grow up under fear. That's all I ever wanted." But celebration wasn't the only reaction. Fear lingered too. In some parts of the capital, shopkeepers hesitated to reopen. Banks limited cash withdrawals. Schools closed for precautionary review. The memory of past crises, civil war, contested elections, still haunted the walls. It feels like freedom, one university student said, but we don't know what comes next. In the military barracks, many soldiers remained at their posts, watching, waiting, calm. The tension had broken, but the discipline remained. Commander Kone had ordered one thing above all else: no violence, no revenge. We are here to protect, not punish. And that order was respected. No mass arrests, no disappearances. No power grabs, just uniforms standing beside citizens, not above them. Across Africa, the shock spread in Lomé. Pro-democracy groups marched in solidarity. In Dakar, hashtags like Sao Kone and Daot New Ivory Coast trended within hours. And in Bamako, a mural of Traoré shaking hands with Kone appeared overnight on a city wall, painted by youth, unsigned. In a village near the Liberian border, an elder was asked if he believed the country was safe now. He smiled and said, "The storm passed, but we must not forget who held the umbrella." Hope had returned, but now came the hardest part: living with it. At sunrise, all eyes turned north. Every channel in West Africa tuned in to a highly anticipated address from Captain Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso and silent architect of a regional awakening. The backdrop was simple: a flag, a podium, no soldiers. Traoré stood alone, calm, resolute, focused. He began without ceremony. "To the people of Côte d'Ivoire, you have done what many feared was impossible. You reclaimed your country without spilling blood. You proved that silence is not peace, and fear is not order, and you showed the world that dignity can walk, even when power refuses to move." He paused. The world listened. To Commander Kone, your restraint was your greatest weapon. Your calm was your leadership. You did not seize power, you served the people. The message was not loud, it was measured, but each word felt like a bullet fired into the heart of a decaying system. To our neighbors, our brothers, those still living under stolen flags and broken promises. He leaned slightly forward, voice colder now. Understand this: Africa is changing, and puppets are no longer safe. You may hold titles, uniforms, and applause from outside forces, but when your people stand, none of that will protect you. Across the continent, in Togo, activists printed the speech within the hour. In Guinea, student groups projected it on university walls. In Gabon, an anonymous video of military cadets saluting to Traoré's closing words began to circulate. "We are not rebels, we are Africa, and we have decided not to kneel." And back in Côte d'Ivoire, as the video ended, the crowd in Abidjan gathered once more, not to protest, but to listen. One boy, no older than 12, stood on a plastic chair in front of a cheering crowd and yelled, "They said it was a dream, but today, it's real." The final shot of the broadcast, Kone watching Traoré's speech in silence. He turns to his aide and says, "We're not finished, we've just begun." Fade to black.